All right, let's talk about leadership, not the inspirational, I have a dream kind. Oh no, we're diving headfirst into the murky, blood-soaked end of the spectrum. The kind of leadership that makes you wonder if humanity collectively took a wrong turn somewhere around, say, the invention of pointy sticks. On one hand, we have Pol Pot. Yes, Pol Pot. The mere mention of his name conjures up images of the Cambodian genocide, a period so horrific it recalibrated our understanding of man's inhumanity to man. He's the historical benchmark for really, really bad dude, a gold standard in monstrousness that, frankly, you'd hope no one else would ever try to emulate. It's a low bar, and yet here we are. Then fast forward a few decades, and we find ourselves discussing Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving prime minister, a man who has been a fixture in global politics for so long he's practically part of the furniture. Albeit a piece of furniture that's currently under an incredibly uncomfortable international spotlight. The reason? The ongoing situation in Gaza, a conflict that has escalated to the point where the International Criminal Court, an institution not exactly known for its rash decisions, has issued arrest warrants for him. Yes, you heard that right. We're talking alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. Suddenly, a comparison that might have once seemed outlandish, even offensive, starts to demand a closer, albeit deeply unsettling look. Now, comparing any two leaders, especially those associated with such profound human suffering, is a fraught exercise. It's like trying to rank your least favorite plagues. Is it the boils or the locusts that really ruined your week? Pol Pot's regime was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 1.7 to 2 million people, a staggering figure that represents nearly a quarter of Cambodia's population at the time. This wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate, systematic effort to reshape an entire society through terror and extermination. The sheer scale is almost impossible to comprehend, a black hole of brutality that swallowed a nation whole. And yet, the accusations against Netanyahu, particularly concerning the conduct of the war in Gaza, bring forth their own chilling set of questions. We're not just talking about the fog of war here. We're talking about specific indictments from the ICCC concerning the starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, intentional attacks against civilian populations, and crimes against humanity. These are not light accusations. They are the heaviest charges the international community can level. So how do we even begin to unpack this? How do we look at the architect of the killing fields alongside a modern-day prime minister facing such grave allegations without losing our collective minds? Well, we do it carefully and with a very strong stomach. So, who exactly was this Pol Pot chap? Saloth Sar, his real name, doesn't quite have the same ring of terror, does it? He was the leader of the Khmer Rouge, a communist movement that seized power in Cambodia in 1975. Now, many revolutions are born out of a desire for change, for a better world. Pol Pot's vision, however, was less better world and more agrarian nightmare cult based on a complete misunderstanding of everything. He aimed to create a classless, peasant-dominated, agrarian socialist society. Sounds almost quaint if you ignore the part where creating it involved forcibly emptying cities and murdering anyone with glasses because, intellectuals. His rise to power wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow burn, fueled by political instability, the Vietnam War spilling over Cambodia's borders, and a potent cocktail of nationalist and Maoist ideologies. The Khmer Rouge presented themselves as saviors, liberators from a corrupt regime and foreign interference. But the liberation they offered was a twisted, monstrous thing. When they finally marched into Phnom Penh in April 1975, it wasn't the dawn of a new era of peace. It was the beginning of Year Zero, a terrifying concept where history itself was to be reset, and society brutally remade from the ground up, or more accurately from the ground down, 6 feet under. The timeline of this horror show was mercifully short, but devastatingly intense. 1975 to 1979, just 4 years. 4 years to systematically dismantle a country, its culture, its families, and its future. The Khmer Rouge's ideology was radical in the extreme. They abolished money, markets, private property, religion, and traditional education. Cities were forcibly evacuated, their inhabitants driven into the countryside to work as agricultural laborers in vast collective farms. This wasn't just a policy shift. It was a violent upheaval designed to break the spirit and bodies of the Cambodian people, transforming them into cogs in Pol Pot's brutal machine. The death toll, as mentioned, is almost incomprehensible, an estimated 1.7 to 2 million people. That's like wiping out the entire population of Philadelphia. Or perhaps a slightly less terrible analogy, like if a particularly virulent season of a reality TV show actually killed its contestants. These weren't just casualties of war, they were victims of execution, starvation, forced labor and disease, all directly resulting from the policies enacted by Pol Pot and his inner circle. He wasn't just a bad leader, he was an architect of genocide, a man whose name is forever synonymous with some of the darkest atrocities of the 20th century. The Khmer Rouge's reign of terror, dubbed Year Zero, was a horrifyingly literal attempt to erase Cambodia's past and forge a new society from scratch. Imagine your entire world turned upside down overnight. One day you're a teacher, a doctor, a shopkeeper in a bustling city. The next, you're marched at gunpoint into the countryside, stripped of your possessions, your identity and your dignity. This was the reality for millions. The cities, seen as symbols of capitalist decadence and foreign influence, were empty. Phnom Penh, once a vibrant capital, became a ghost town, its former inhabitants driven into a rural nightmare of forced labor and starvation. The methods employed by the Khmer Rouge were systematically brutal. Forced labor was rampant, with people working from dawn till dusk on meager rations, often in appalling conditions. Malnutrition and disease became endemic. Anyone perceived as an enemy of the revolution, intellectuals, professionals, former government officials, ethnic minorities like the Vietnamese and Cham Muslims, or even people who simply wore glasses or spoke a foreign language, was targeted for elimination. Families were broken apart, children indoctrinated to spy on their parents. The regime aimed to destroy every social bond, every vestige of the old world, leaving only loyalty to Angkar, the faceless, omnipresent party organization. The infamous killing fields sites scattered across the Cambodian countryside became the final resting place for hundreds of thousands. These weren't sophisticated extermination camps. Often victims were bludgeoned to death to save bullets. The cruelty was intimate and savage. Places like Tul Sleng, a former high school in Phnom Penh, transformed into the S-21 interrogation and torture center, became symbols of the regime's barbarity. Thousands were imprisoned, tortured, and forced to confess to imaginary crimes before being sent to their deaths. It was a meticulously organized system of terror designed to crush any dissent and purify the population according to Pol Pot's warped vision. The societal dismantling was total. Monasteries were defiled, ancient traditions banned, and cultural heritage systematically destroyed. The Khmer Rouge sought to create a new Cambodian unburdened by history or education, a blank slate upon which their extremist ideology could be imprinted. The result was not a utopia of agrarian simplicity, but a charnel house. The famine that swept the country was not just a byproduct of incompetence. It was a direct consequence of policies that prioritized ideological purity over human life, leading to widespread starvation, even as rice was sometimes left to rot or exported. Pol Pot didn't just lead a country, he presided over its auto-genocide. Now, let's shift our gaze to a more contemporary figure, Benjamin Netanyahu. Bibi, as he's widely known, is a towering figure in Israeli politics, a man who has shaped his nation's trajectory for decades. He's the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history, a testament to his political acumen, his resilience, and some might say his relentless grip on power. His supporters see him as Mr. Security, a staunch defender of Israel in a hostile region, a bulwark against existential threats. His detractors, however, paint a very different picture, that of a divisive leader, an obstructor of peace, and increasingly a figure whose actions are drawing severe international condemnation and legal scrutiny. The context, of course, is the intractable Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a saga of pain, dispossession and violence that has spanned generations. Netanyahu's tenure has been marked by a hardline approach, an expansion of settlements in the West Bank, and multiple wars in Gaza. While he has overseen periods of economic growth and diplomatic breakthroughs, his legacy is increasingly defined by the current conflict that erupted with horrifying intensity following the Hamas attacks of October 7, 2023. That day of unprecedented violence against Israelis triggered a response from Netanyahu's government that has plunged Gaza into a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions. fundamentally altering how many around the world view his leadership. For a long time, Netanyahu managed to navigate international criticism while maintaining strong support from key allies, particularly the United States. But the sheer scale of civilian suffering in Gaza, the mounting death toll, and the shocking images emerging from the besieged enclave have created a seismic shift. What was once criticism largely confined to activist circles and certain international bodies has now breached the mainstream. We're seeing open questioning of Israel's tactics, even from its staunchest friends. President Biden himself in late May 2025 suggested Netanyahu might be prolonging the war for political self-preservation, a rather stunning comment from the leader of Israel's most important ally. The core of the current storm surrounding Netanyahu revolves around the allegations of grave breaches of international law during the Gaza war. It's one thing to fight a war against a designated terrorist group like Hamas. It's quite another to be accused by the world's highest criminal court of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in the process. These aren't just abstract legal terms, they represent accusations of deliberately causing immense suffering to a civilian population. This is the heavy cloud under which Netanyahu now operates, transforming him from a controversial but largely accepted world leader into one facing profound international legal and moral challenges. Section 5: Gaza under siege, a litany of modern suffering. The situation in Gaza, especially since October 2023, is, to put it mildly, a humanitarian horror show. We're talking about a densely populated strip of land home to over 2 million people subjected to intense Israeli military operations, including relentless airstrikes and ground raids. The stated aim is to dismantle Hamas, the group responsible for the horrific October 7th attacks, but the consequence, regardless of intent, has been a civilian catastrophe on a scale that has shocked the world. Thousands upon thousands of Palestinians, a significant portion of them women and children, have been killed and many more injured. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble. This isn't a distant conflict, it's playing out in real time on our screens. Beyond the immediate casualties of bombardment, the humanitarian impact has been devastating and multifaceted. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been displaced, forced to flee their homes multiple times, often with nowhere safe to go. They are living in makeshift shelters, overcrowded camps, or simply out in the open, facing dire conditions. According to numerous international aid organizations and even the ICC prosecutor, actions attributed to Netanyahu's government include severe restrictions on the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. This means civilians have been deprived of the absolute essentials for survival: food, clean water, medicine, electricity, and fuel. It's a slow-motion disaster unfolding before our very eyes. The results of these restrictions are predictable and tragic. We're seeing widespread malnutrition, particularly among children, dehydration, and a healthcare system that has all but collapsed. Hospitals have been damaged, besieged, or forced to close due to lack of supplies and staff. The spread of infectious diseases is rampant in the unsanitary and overcrowded conditions. Medical care for the wounded and the sick is often rudimentary or non-existent. Imagine trying to keep your children safe and healthy when the very air you breathe seems to carry the threat of death, either from a missile or from the insidious creep of starvation and disease. It's a living nightmare, and the conflict isn't confined to Gaza. The research notes highlight that since the start of the Gaza war, over 500 Palestinians have reportedly been killed in the West Bank by Israeli security forces as of late May 2025. This broader context adds another layer to the crisis. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's government has also firmly expressed its refusal to agree to a two-state solution, a cornerstone of most international peace efforts for decades. This stance, combined with the alleged actions in Gaza, paints a picture of a leadership that is, according to its critics, not only prosecuting a brutal war, but also potentially closing off avenues for a lasting peace, further entrenching the suffering. Section 6. The Hague calls Netanyahu and the spectre of war crimes. Then came the bombshell, or perhaps the entirely predictable consequence of months of escalating horror: the International Criminal Court. On November 21, 2024, the ICC's Pre-Trial Chamber 1 issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. This wasn't some fringe human rights group making accusations. This was the ICC, the Permanent International Court established to investigate and prosecute individuals for the most serious crimes of concern to the international community: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. Suddenly, Bibi was in the same sentence as a formal legal process usually reserved for deposed dictators and warlords. The specific charges are deeply troubling and paint a grim picture of the conduct of the Gaza war. For Netanyahu, these include the war crime of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare. Let that sink in, deliberately using hunger as a weapon. Other charges include crimes against humanity, specifically murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts, as well as the war crime of intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population. The time frame for these alleged crimes, as cited by the ICC, is from at least October 8, 2023, the day after the Hamas attacks, through to May 20, 2024, though the impact and investigations are of course ongoing. Naturally, Israel, which is not a state party to the Rome Statute that created the ICC, vehemently rejected the court's jurisdiction and denounced the prosecutor's actions as politically motivated and anti-Semitic. Netanyahu himself called it an outrage and an attack on Israel's right to self-defense. However, the ICC prosecutor and judges clearly believe they do have jurisdiction based on Palestine's accession to the Rome Statute and previous rulings concerning the court's territorial jurisdiction over Palestine, including Gaza. This legal battle over jurisdiction is complex, but the moral and political implications of an active ICC warrant against a sitting head of government are undeniable and profound. The ICC's move has sent shockwaves through the international community. It underscores the gravity of the situation in Gaza and the mounting evidence of alleged systematic abuses. While an arrest warrant doesn't equate to a conviction, it signifies that ICC judges found reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant have committed these crimes. This places an obligation on all 124 state parties to the Rome Statute to arrest them if they enter their territory. It's a significant legal and diplomatic hurdle for Netanyahu, further isolating him and his government on the world stage and forcing an uncomfortable reckoning with the human cost of the conflict. Section 7. Global Glare. How the world sees two contentious figures. The international response to Pol Pot was eventually one of universal condemnation. Once the full scale of the Cambodian genocide became known, after Vietnam invaded and toppled the Khmer Rouge regime in 1979, the world reacted with horror. Pol Pot became a pariah, a symbol of ultimate evil. His regime was isolated, and though he evaded justice for decades, dying in 1998 under house arrest by his own former comrades, his legacy is one of unambiguous infamy. There are no Pol Pot apologists in mainstream discourse, no debates about the complexities of the killing fields. It was simply genocide, a clear-cut case of a leader orchestrating mass murder on an industrial scale. Benjamin Netanyahu, however, occupies a far more complex and divisive space in current international perception. He certainly isn't universally condemned like Pol Pot, not yet anyway. He still commands support from significant segments of the Israeli population and has allies internationally, particularly within conservative circles in the United States. Yet the tide is undeniably turning. The ICC arrest warrant is a massive blow to his international standing. As the Pew Research Survey from March 2025 showed, 53% of Americans now hold an unfavorable view of Israel, a notable increase. And Netanyahu's personal ratings are even worse. 52% of Americans lack confidence in his handling of world affairs, a figure that spikes to 87% among Muslim Americans and, perhaps surprisingly, 53% among Jewish Americans. The actions of Netanyahu's government have sparked widespread global criticism, well beyond the usual circles. We've seen international leaders and organizations, including the United Nations, repeatedly calling for a ceasefire, unimpeded humanitarian aid, and independent investigations into alleged unlawful killings. President Biden's aforementioned jab about Netanyahu potentially prolonging the war for political reasons highlights a growing rift even with Israel's closest ally. Far-right leaders in Netanyahu's own coalition who oppose any peace agreement short of Hamas's total destruction further complicate his image and make diplomatic solutions appear even more remote, fueling international frustration. Furthermore, there's a tangible shift in diplomatic landscapes. In late May 2025, countries like Slovenia announced their recognition of the State of Palestine, joining a growing list and signaling increasing impatience with the status quo and Israel's policies under Netanyahu. This isn't just symbolic, it reflects a genuine recalibration of international stances. While Pol Pot's crimes led to his eventual complete isolation from a horrified world, Netanyahu is currently navigating a storm of rising global opprobrium, legal challenges and shifting allegiances, all while still very much in power and actively directing a war that continues to exact a terrible human toll. The world is watching, and its patience appears to be wearing thin. Section 8. Weighing the scales, intent, ideology and international law. When comparing figures like Pol Pot and Netanyahu, the question of intent looms large, though it's a notoriously difficult thing to prove, especially from the outside. Pol Pot's stated motivation was ideological, the creation of a pure agrarian communist society. His regime's actions, however horrific, were in service of this twisted utopia. The Khmer Rouge genuinely seemed to believe that by exterminating class enemies, intellectuals and urban populations, they could forge a new, uncorrupted Cambodian people. The result was genocide, a direct and intentional outcome of their ideology. Even if the perfect society part never quite materialized, it was a planned demolition of a nation. Netanyahu's stated motivations are, of course, vastly different. He frames his actions, particularly in Gaza, as essential for Israel's security, a necessary response to the existential threat posed by Hamas and other militant groups. The goal, as articulated by his government, is to destroy Hamas's military capabilities and ensure such an attack like October 7th can never happen again. However, critics, including now the ICC prosecutor, allege that the methods used to achieve this goal are criminal. President Biden's suggestion that Netanyahu might be prolonging the war for political self-preservation adds another layer, implying that personal power rather than purely national security could be a driving factor. This raises questions about whether the devastating impact on civilians is a regrettable byproduct or something more calculated. The scale of death and destruction under Pol Pot is, in absolute numbers, vastly greater than what has occurred in Gaza under Netanyahu's leadership, at least to date. Pol Pot was directly responsible for the deaths of 1.7 to 2 million people in just 4 years. The figures from Gaza, while horrifying tens of thousands killed, a humanitarian crisis affecting over 2 million, do not reach that genocidal magnitude in terms of raw numbers or percentage of population exterminated. However, the nature of the alleged atrocities attributed to Netanyahu's command by the ICC, starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, intentional attacks on civilians, persecution, are profoundly serious crimes under international law. This is where the comparison becomes particularly thorny. Pol Pot's regime operated with a chilling internal logic, dismantling its own society from within, largely before the widespread codification of international criminal law as it exists today with the ICC. Netanyahu, on the other hand, is a leader in the 21st century, operating under the full glare of international media, humanitarian organizations, and established international legal frameworks. The ICC's accusations suggest a deliberate flouting of these laws, a conscious choice to employ methods that lead to massive civilian suffering in pursuit of military and perhaps political aims. The existence of these laws and institutions makes the alleged commission of such crimes arguably a more direct affront to the established global order. Section 9 Conclusion. The uncomfortable calculus. Why Netanyahu's actions define a deeper betrayal. Concluding a comparison like this feels like trying to find the least worst option between a shark attack and being set on fire. Both are unequivocally terrible. Pol Pot's regime stands as one of history's most monstrous chapters. The Cambodian genocide, with its 1.7 to 2 million deaths, Its systematic eradication of intellectuals, its forced labor, and its engineered famine represents an almost unimaginable descent into barbarity. The sheer scale of the killing, the ideological fanaticism that drove it, and the utter devastation inflicted upon an entire nation place Pol Pot firmly in the pantheon of history's most reviled tyrants. There is no minimizing the horror of the killing fields. Yet the brief demands a difficult judgment, and when we look at Benjamin Netanyahu, the nature of the accusations against him in the context of our modern interconnected world presents a uniquely disturbing picture. The ICC's pursuit of an arrest warrant for alleged war crimes, including the deliberate starvation of civilians as a method of warfare and intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population, is not an indictment of a bygone era of state-sponsored slaughter in an isolated nation. These are charges against the leader of a technologically advanced, democratic allied state, occurring right now under the full scrutiny of global media, international law, and countless humanitarian watchdogs. This is not hidden horror, it is horror alleged to be unfolding with the world bearing witness. While Pol Pot's atrocities were vast and genocidal in their scope and intent, aiming to annihilate entire segments of his own population to forge a mad utopia, the allegations against Netanyahu speak to a different yet profoundly disturbing kind of transgression. If the ICC's charges are proven, they would point to a leader consciously choosing tactics that inflict catastrophic suffering on a trapped civilian population, allegedly using starvation as a tool of war, all while aware of the explicit prohibitions under international humanitarian law. This isn't about a failed state succumbing to madness, it's about a powerful state actor, allegedly choosing to disregard fundamental principles of humanity and law in pursuit of its objectives, despite clear alternatives and repeated international warnings. Therefore, and this is a grim calculus indeed, Netanyahu's alleged actions in Palestine, particularly the specific war crimes the ICC accuses him of, arguably represent a more insidious betrayal of the responsibilities of leadership in the 21st century. To be accused of deliberately orchestrating famine-like conditions and attacking civilians not in the shadows but on the world stage, in defiance of established international legal norms designed to prevent precisely such suffering, marks a profound and arguably worse failure of moral and legal leadership. Pol Pot was a monster in an age of monsters. For a modern leader to face such accusations suggests a terrifying erosion of established human values, making his alleged crimes a uniquely jarring affront to our current, albeit imperfect, global conscience.